What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and welcome to week 5 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2025 CFL season and postseason. And we're back down here. I'm taking my chances with the ghost, because clearly upstairs didn't help. So remember how last week I did some good things and gave it all back on the totals? So this past week, I did some good things and gave it all back on the spreads. 0-4 against the spread, which is that's criminal. That's just awful. That is the one thing I could even bear with going 0-4 straight up and just okay, I was totally off base. But 0-4 against the spread, for some reason that hurts so much more. It was 2-2 straight up. Was actually 3-1 on the totals last week. Hey, wouldn't you know it? Stranger things have happened. 3-1 on the totals, 2-2 straight up, and gave it all back on the spreads. That is definitely not what I was intending to do. I feel like I let my Canadian brethren down on Canada Day weekend. Anyway, 10-6 straight up. Now 7-9 against the spread. So went from 2 games above 500 to 2 games under 500 against the spread. Not where we want to be. But now 4-11-1 on the totals because we had a good week on the totals. So still 5 games underwater for the whole season. 21-26-1 after going 5-7 last week. I feel like this is the slowest start to any season that I've had so far. And this is year 7? What I did have was a monster week, though, in CFL Fantasy. 132.4 points in CFL Fantasy last week. That brings me to 428 exactly on the season, and it pulls my average up from, what was it last week? I think it was 98.5. Pulls the average up to 107 points even per week. We're still so early in the season, but one big week, and it really shoots you up the leaderboard. For instance, I increased 257 spots overall from last week, now sitting in 779 overall. The top 500, 444.8, so I'm only less than 20 points behind that, well less than 20 points behind the top 500. And the top 250 is 465.2, so I'm in striking distance there as well. It was a really good week in fantasy. Also made a lot of moves in my 2 CFL Fantasy Football leagues. CFL Central, I jumped all the way up to 129th out of 1,221 entries. That's an increase of 110 spots. And in Christina Costable's league, I jumped well inside the top 100. I'm even in the top 70 now. 67th out of 352 entries. Good week in fantasy. I jumped up 110 spots and 52 spots respectively in those 2 leagues. And that was at least in part on the back of quarterback Zach Collaros. A 4-touchdown game for Zach, including one on the ground. Attaboy, Zach. 334 yards passing, 3 passing touchdowns, a rush touchdown, good for 32.3 points. But across my whole roster, everybody was at least 10 points or more, except for the REDBLACKS on defense. That was the one spot where I really kind of stumbled a little bit. The REDBLACKS did not have a good defensive performance, but everybody was up above 10. I had AJ Ouellette, who had himself a very big week. Could have had 10 more points if I'd have had Collaros as my captain instead of Ouellette, but man, it was a big week across the board. And we're going to have another big week across the board, but it's going to be a big week both in fantasy and in these picks. We got to go. We got to break through this glass ceiling here sometime. It might as well be now. Our week 5 slate of games in the CFL looks like this. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers are on the road in Calgary taking on the Stamps. Stamps coming off of their bye from last week. The Hamilton Ticats are in Toronto for the first meeting of the Battle of the QEW. Ticats and Argos. The BC Lions are in Montreal taking on an Alouettes team who is begging for Davis Alexander to come back. And the Ottawa REDBLACKS are on the road in Edmonton taking on an Elks team that's still looking for their first win on the season. The 4-0 straight up, 4-0 against the spread Saskatchewan Roughriders get their bye this week. And boy, have they ever been paying off here in the early part of the season. So let's kick things off in Calgary. Winnipeg and Calgary, the Bombers at the Stampeders. And the Bombers, in their game last week, pulled away in the fourth quarter game against Edmonton. They had a 13-0 run in the fourth quarter to stay unbeaten and down the Elks. I believe that game was that game was in Winnipeg. 421 yards of total offense, which absolutely powers a 4-touchdown game from Zach Collaros, like I mentioned, including one on the ground, which is big news. And the biggest news for the Bombers, most outstanding player Brady Oliveira is back, like full go at practice. So welcome back, Brady. He's atop the depth chart for this game this week. That is bad news for everyone that's not Winnipeg. It's early, but winning games in this situation, which is when the other top team or teams in the division are on bye, playing this week and winning this week, very, very important as you go down the stretch towards the end of the season. So the fact that Saskatchewan at 4-0 is off this week makes it a very critical game for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to try to stay undefeated and match their record at 4-0. It's a critical game. In Calgary, the Stampeders, of course, come in off of their bye after dropping that rain-soaked game against Ottawa a couple of weeks ago. It was week 3. I think it was like 20-12 or something like that. The game where there was barely any passing. In fact, the run game got absolutely spammed in that game on both sides, and it was pretty on point. The Stamps put up 160 yards rushing on 25 carries as a team. Problem there, of course, being Ottawa put up 239 yards on 31. But I tell you what really cost the Stamps the game last week, and what is not a winning recipe whatsoever, is turning the ball over 5 times. Now, 3 of those turnovers came on downs. So I appreciate when a coaching staff is aggressive. And I think in a game like this, where you're Calgary and you're playing a team that I think is objectively better than you in Winnipeg, I think you have to be aggressive like that. You have to steal possessions. You have to try to steal points. So going forward on third down, being aggressive, I don't outright hate it. It's important against top teams. I feel like it was somewhat less important in that game last week in what was ultimately a 1-possession game. But turning the ball over 3 times, it just puts you in bad positions. I don't really have much of any reason, I think, to go against the Bombers this week. Look, they're unbeaten. They've covered the spread all 3 of their games. They're scoring points. The defense is playing well. Calgary's been kind of up and down. They've covered 2 of 3 spreads, so that's definitely something. But I don't know, they've been a little Jekyll and Hyde, whereas I think Winnipeg has been just objectively good basically all season. Let's take the Bombers here on the road in Calgary to win the Stampede Bowl and get the win over the Stampeders. On the line, Winnipeg is laying -3.5 here as a fairly strong road favorite. Again, Winnipeg's covered all 3 spreads they've had so far this season. Calgary, to their credit, has covered 2 of 3, which is good, but I think it's tough. That's such a small margin for error there when I like Winnipeg to win the game. So let's lay the -3.5 here on the Bombers. Total in the game set at 51 points. I actually like an under here, I think. Calgary's defense has been, I think, maybe better than I've given them credit for. At this early part of the season, Winnipeg's offense has not been totally on fire, and their defense is very, very good. So I like an under in this one, I think. Under 51 points in Bombers Stampeders. Let's go like 27-20 in favor of Winnipeg. So Bombers cover, Bombers win, and give me an under on the point total. We travel to QEW now for the Hamilton Ticats on the road in Toronto, taking on the Argos. Argos still waiting to take their first bye week of the season, whereas Hamilton has had one of theirs. And the Ticats are coming off a game that was arguably their most complete game of this season so far. They doubled up the Montreal Alouettes, of course, without Davis Alexander in the lineup. The run defense for Hamilton was immaculate in that game. Only allowed 38 yards rushing on 10 carries to Montreal as a team. And Montreal is a team that has a solid foundation, or historically has at least, of running the football. Not so much so far this season. That's kind of the one area they've really struggled. Their secondary picked off 2 of McLeod Bethel-Thompson's 41 pass attempts. That included a pick 6, which was one of 2 defensive touchdowns for the Hamilton Ticats last week. Massive game for that whole unit. In Toronto, the Argos are finally off the schneid this season after a 2-possession win against the Red Blacks. That game was 18-3 at the half as the Toronto Argos punished Crum behind the line of scrimmage for the Red Blacks. 5 quarterback sacks for Toronto in that game last week. Their defense also generated 3 turnovers and went 3 for 4 defensively in the red zone. So it's not like Ottawa didn't have their chances in that game. The Argos defense was up to the task. And look, that defense is much maligned by me. It's been maligned by me most of the season. The run defense did give up 130 yards rushing on 23 carries and a rushing touchdown, I believe, to Crum at the quarterback position. So they gave up a lot on the ground, but they made the plays that they needed to make. And once again, generating 3 turnovers and 5 quarterback sacks, more than enough of an effort to win that game last week. I feel like this is a slight step up in competition this week for the Argos. They get the benefit of being at home, but they've lost both their home games so far this year. So it's not exactly like they've been friendly confines in Toronto. I think I'm going to take the Ticats here. I think right now they're the better offense. It looks like it's going to be Arbuckle at quarterback until at least week 7 before the possibility of Chad Kelly coming back into the lineup. I think the Ticats have the better roster, at least right now. I think they're a better roster. I think they're playing better. They should be getting Greg Bell back at the running back position this week, which is big for their offense. Give me the Ticats on the road to get the win here over the Argos. Now on the line, Toronto is taking plus a single point as a very marginal home dog. I like Hamilton to win. We're laying basically the smallest number that we can, so let's lay the -1 on the Ticats. Total in the game set at 52.5 points. I really like this to go over. I think this does wind up being a shootout because, again, Hamilton's defense had a great week last week. Historically, not so much. So give me an over in this one. I think we see a lot of points, a lot of fireworks. Over 52.5 points in Hamilton, Toronto. I'm going to go 31-24 in favor of the road Ticats. Ticats win, Ticats cover the -1, and give me an over on the 52.5 points. Our next game is a battle of West versus East. The BC Lions traveling to Montreal to take on the Alouettes. Now, the BC Lions last week were victimized by a noxious cocktail, a bad combination of sloppy play overall against a pretty opportune defense in the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Jeremiah Masoli picked off 3 times in that game, which led directly to 17 points on the board, including a pick 6. That was basically the difference in that football game last week. And Masoli ultimately got benched for the last drive of the game in favor of Bryce. So look, man, BC is definitely hoping that Nathan Rourke is available and ready for this game. They also took 14 penalties for $125 in penalty yardage, and you know I'm going to say something about that. And I think what was so bad about that game for the Lions is it ruined a great game for James Butler. James Butler touched the ball 29 times in that game last week for 129 all-purpose yards and a rush touchdown. Huge volume. It's what you want with a guy like James Butler. The unfortunate part of that being he was kind of overshadowed by AJ Ouellette, who touched the ball 24 times for $151 all-purpose yards and a rush touchdown. So he was a little overshadowed by that, but just as a whole, like, BC did not put themselves in a position to win that football game, despite that incredible offensive showing from Butler. On Montreal's side of the ball, we talked about it a little bit, but they struggled without Davis Alexander under center. Just 226 total yards against the Ticats defense. So, like, look, no shade to Hamilton, but even their most ardent fans, I think, would admit their defense is not great. So, I mean, look, the fact that Montreal only put up 226 in total in yardage, had basically no run game whatsoever, which we talked about a little bit earlier. 4 total turnovers for the Alouettes offense, which multiple of those went back for scores. One of them was a pick 6. One of them was a fumble recovery for a touchdown. Again, negligible run game. this is a good defense in Montreal, but you can't ask them to cover up every single miscue and bumblefuck, and there were more than a few miscues and bumblefucks in that game on the offensive side for Montreal. The good part for Montreal being, we know they're not that team, and Davis Alexander's probably back this week. I'm going to come right out and say it. I am concerned with what I'm seeing in BC, and I get that Nathan Rourke hasn't been fully healthy, and it's been a couple of games without him, but that cascades down to the entirety of the rest of the team, and I'm not really seeing the rest of the team step up to that occasion. I just haven't really seen it much this season. Both of these teams are still looking for their first bye week on the season. So look, they've each played 4 games. They're about the same in terms of, one team feeling a little wearier than the other. You don't really have that too much. The Lions are still looking for their first win on the road this season. The Alouettes have covered 3 times against the spread. I think we're going to have to go ahead and take the Alouettes here, who are home favorites in this game. Let's take Montreal again with hopefully the returning Davis Alexander, which should open everything up for the offense. Let's take Montreal at home to get the win over BC. On the line, Montreal is laying -4 here as a fairly strong home favorite. I'm going to go ahead and lay that because, again, Montreal's covered 3 spreads this year. The Lions have only covered 1. Montreal's also gone over in 3 of their 4 games. So I think the offense getting to the point where they can cover -4 should be fine, assuming, Davis Alexander is back. So let's go ahead and cover the -4 for the Alouettes. Total in the game set at 49 points. I'm going to take an over on this, but I feel like this is a pretty good number. I feel like this is right about where this number is going to land. So give me an over, but it's a marginal one. Let's go like 30-21 in favor of the Alouettes. So Montreal wins. Montreal covers the -4 and give me an over on the 49 points. But again, that one's close. I don't hate you if you take it under there. And the last game of the week sees the Ottawa REDBLACKS on the road in Edmonton, taking on an Elks team who, as we mentioned, still looking for their first win on the season. Ottawa is not playing great. They've lost 2 decisive games, pretty decisive games in the last 3 weeks. This most recent one at home to Toronto by multiple possessions, and another situation where, man, the starting quarterback here cannot come back soon enough, that being Drew Brown. Even if Crum is absolutely gold as a runner, which he absolutely is. And look, he went, I think it was 20 for 30 last week. He did throw an interception. He didn't throw for a touchdown. He got one on the ground. So, 20 for 30 is not bad. It's salvageable. And I think the yardage was okay. But, look, Drew Brown's one game he's had this season was over 400 yards passing, I think. So, we are not the same here. We are not the same in this conversation. They really, really need Drew Brown to come back. But even if he does come back, the offensive line really struggled last week. They allowed those 5 quarterback sacks by the Argos. They had 3 turnovers last week on the offensive side. Again, it's been 2 bad games in 3 weeks now for the REDBLACKS. Don't really know how we're feeling about this team, but I can't feel like it's good. Speaking of not feeling good, it's the Edmonton Elks. Listen, there's that quote, it's the hope that kills you. And I feel like that's kind of what we're facing here with the Elks. I think we came into the season with hope for Trey Ford and hope for the offense. And I even said it in my season preview. I was like, if the defense can take any step forward, this team should be competitive and should be a threat. We haven't really seen that much to this point in the season, even though I think you could argue the effort last week was winnable. It was at least a winnable effort. And when I say that, this is exactly what I mean. The Elks entered the 4th quarter of that game last week, tied with Winnipeg. They were competitive with the Blue Bombers for 3 quarters of that game. And then in the 4th quarter, they just had nothing. Their possessions in the 4th quarter were punt, 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 and then they ended the game with the ball in their hands, but not with a chance to win, because they were already down the 10 points, and it was fait accompli. Again, it was a winnable effort. Trey Ford was clean in that game. 252 yards passing, threw a touchdown, did not throw a pick. Only had 1 carry on the ground. I think it was 1 for I don't know what it was. It was decent yardage, I think, or it was 1 for 6 or something like that. So they really didn't employ him much as a runner. And you'd think, especially in the fourth quarter of a close game, you'd really want to do that. Anyway, Kai and Julian Grant, another highlight for the Elks last week. 5 catches for $115 and that one receiving touchdown from Trey Ford. There were winnable elements of that game for Edmonton. They just had nothing in the fourth quarter. I feel like this is a battle of two teams that you can make an argument for or against betting for either of them in this, basically either way that it goes. Here's what I'm going to say. Edmonton has had a bye week already this season. So they're going to be relatively rested. Ottawa has not. Ottawa's played 4 games. This is going to be their 5th. They're still waiting for a bye week. So there is something of a rest discrepancy here between the two teams. I think if it's not Drew Brown this week, I think these two teams are pretty darn level. And on a talent argument, I might say Edmonton's a little higher. I think I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to take the Elks to get the upset here, and it is an upset even though the game's in Edmonton. I'm going to take the Elks to get the upset win here against the Red Blacks. Give me Edmonton to beat Ottawa. Now on the line, Edmonton is taking +2 points here as a home dog. I like them to win. Give me the +2. Total in the game set at 52.5. I think this is another one that's going over. Both of these defenses have been suspect this season. I think this game could probably touch 60, which I think is probably where I'm going to go with it. Give me a 33-27, something like that. I expect this game to get to 60. A lot of points, a lot of fireworks. Give me the Edmonton Elks to get off the schneid, get their first win of the season. Edmonton beats Ottawa in Edmonton. So give me the Elks to win, give me the Elks to cover, and give me an over on the 52.5. Now, there's going to be a little bit of kind of wiggle room in CFL Fantasy for me this week, but my Week 5 CFL Fantasy roster is right in front of your eyes right now, and you're going to notice right away, Trey Ford is my QB1. Basically, for me, this is a 3-person conversation. This week, it's either Trey Ford, Zach Collaros, or Bo Levi Mitchell. And the reason that I went with Ford right now is he's a little bit cheaper. So right now in the roster, it's Trey Ford, and I'm actually stacking him with Steven Dunbar in my flex. Steven Dunbar has gotten 17 targets in the last 2 weeks from Trey Ford. So that volume, we like that a lot. At running back, we tried to save some money here. It's the return of Greg Bell, ideally. He's only, I think, $9K. And then Daniel Adeboboye, who has taken over the starting job in Ottawa from William Stanback. And he's really cheap. He's only I think, 5.8K or something like that. So we're spending down on the running back position this week, but that's also part and parcel of why I want to save a little bit of money. At wide receiver, we're grabbing Kenny Lawler. He's the only receiver in the CFL, I think, who's played all of his team's games and has at least 10 targets a game. I think it's 3 games. He's got 31 targets. So that is, again, wild volume, and it's a volume game. So we got Kenny Lawler and then Carrick Wheatfall. I saved a little bit of money taking Carrick Wheatfall there for the Bombers, who has just had a really good start to the season. A great deep threat there for Winnipeg. I am going to lean on the Bombers on the defensive side right now. I am looking at either the Bombers or the Alouettes, but I kind of think based on how I think the game's going to go, I'm going to lean on the Bombers. I did leave myself about $3,400 in terms of wiggle room. A lot of that is based on whether or not Greg Bell plays. It looks like he's going to. He's been he's been practicing. So it looks like he's going to, but if he doesn't, then I'm going to have to shift there, and I may need to swap some other things around. There you have it, folks. Those are my picks and plays for Week 5 in the CFL. We'll go over them here with you one more time. I've got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers going to Calgary and beating the Stampeders 27-20. Bombers win. Bombers cover -3.5 and an under on the 51-point total. I got the Hamilton Ticats in Toronto beating the Toronto Argos by a score of 31-24, taking the Ticats minus the single point and an over on the 52.5 point total. I got the Montreal Alouettes at home beating the BC Lions 30-21. I'm laying -4 on Montreal in a game that goes over the 49-point total. And in Edmonton, I've got the Elks with a moderate home upset, beating the Ottawa REDBLACKS 33-27, taking the +2 on Edmonton, and an over on the 52.5-point total. Ladies and gentlemen, those are the games. Those are the picks for week 5. You gotta believe in my track record over the last 6 years. You gotta believe that the comeback begins now. And please, ghost in the back room. Somebody, please, gotta believe the turnaround starts now. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Enjoy the games in week 5. I hope you watched the Justin and Tyler Mid-Year Movie Awards and have been enjoying those. We will see you again for week number 6.